Hello, my name is Chelsea Sexton. I am a doctoral student at the University of Georgia, working on a degree in science education. So I'm going to be presenting on the Continuum, reviewing pre-service sustainability science education literature. My passion and my research focus is very much on sustainability, and that is what I plan on focusing my dissertation on. And this is kind of one of those first steps towards starting to understand the field. All right, so first I had to kind of think about my purpose and my problem. So Andrea Ely is a coffee mogul, but he once said, education beats at the heart of sustainability. And I really resonate with that. Because if we as teacher educators aren't teaching the next generation of teachers about and for sustainability and how to then teach that in their own classrooms, who will? And so I wanted to take some recent literature that's been published that found that really in higher education, we're kind of straying away from this emancipatory and transformative teaching towards more structure and content focus, and see if that's also present within teacher education. So my research questions ended up being, what is the nature of pre-service sustainability education with regard to Corbett's spectrum of environmental ideologies, as well as Poppin, Fuss, and colleagues' framework of interacting pedagogies. To do this, I needed to kind of see how science teacher educators were publishing on or utilizing either the structure agency or knowing or being within their sustainability classes and programs, and then do these teacher ed programs tend more towards anthropocentrism or ecocentrism. So once I established that kind of problem, purpose, and my research questions, I had to actually go and do my database search. So I used EBSCO and ProQuest Education. I had some pretty specific key terms there, but I searched all of the text to get the broadest representation. And then I also used our school's Gill search for books and more, and I had to use much broader search terms, or I probably would have missed most of the books because only certain chapters might have been useful to me in a lot of the edited volumes. So what did that selection actually look like? I first started with my 3 databases, found a total of 42 from EBSCO, 288 from ProQuest, and 18 books from Gill. And I wanted to look at what has been published after the decade of sustainability from the United Nations, because I wanted to see after that official push was over, what's still going on. So after I delimited to those published after 2015, I got 14 from EBSCO, 180 from ProQuest, and 12 from Gill. I used Ryan QCRI, which is an online program specifically for inclusion and exclusion of literature reviews for systematic lit searches. So once I went through Ryan and got rid of any of the duplicates, I had 205. So I reviewed all those titles and abstracts for inclusion exclusion. So I was able to exclude 169 because they weren't about teacher education, they weren't about sustainability, or they specifically focused on in-service teachers rather than pre-service teachers. So that gave me 31 articles and 5 books. I then went through the table of contents for each of those edited books to see which chapters I would accept for a full read. And I accepted and included 27. This gave me 58 articles to fully read through and begin to code using my a priori considerations from the frameworks that I'll discuss in a minute. I was able to exclude another 19 because they weren't explicitly about education for sustainability or sustainability education. They were not explicitly pre-service teacher education. So this left me with a total of 39 sources. So once I had my selection done, I went to my frameworks and results. So as you can see, I used 2 separate frameworks and plotted my results graphically using those same frameworks for ease of understanding. So first off, I used Julia Corbett's spectrum from her book Environmental Messaging in 2006. She goes from anthropocentric to ecocentric, with the anthropocentric being this unrestrained instrumentalism where everything is only useful because it's useful to humans. And then we move into conservationism, preservationism. We have those ethics and value-driven ideologies, and then transformative ideologies, which gets into a lot of the post-human literature, and that is very ecocentric. So I was able to plot all of my literature, all 39 articles, within that spectrum. You'll notice I have some kind of in between because it had elements of both, let's say, unrestrained instrumentalism and conservationism. So I did kind of cut the difference sometimes to avoid some of that Cartesian dualism. You see that most articles published are definitely on the side of anthropocentrism instead of moving towards that ecocentrism, which is okay. This was very much an exploratory idea for me. There's nothing wrong with teaching it in relation to humans or decentering the human. So this was an interesting finding for me. Next, I went to Pop and Fuss's framework. I did take a little bit of creative agency and flipped it vertically. When they published it, they actually had their transformative and emancipatory in the bottom right. And while we're trying to get rid of some of this Cartesian dualism, I definitely still subscribe to the Cartesian plane of positive and positive being in the upper right. So I flipped it for my own uses. But you see there's these 2 different spectrum. We have on the x-axis structure and agency, kind of having that instrumental teaching to emancipatory teaching. And then on the y-axis, we have transmissive and transformative teaching, which is going from that knowing and that content focus to really being and process focused, and what I consider more like embodied learning. So with this one, we had 4 different kind of quadrants, and then just like before with Corbett's, I allowed them to split the difference if they showed elements of both of both sides of the spectrum. So what that looked like here was we had a lot in the transmissive and instrumental, so that kind of structure and content. And I think that's because this was the first introduction that many of these students were getting to sustainability, and the teachers believe that they need to explain and give them that structure before they can ask them to run wild with it. But we do see actually the highest concentration in transformative and emancipatory in that quadrant 4, which Pop and Fuss and colleagues consider this wild decolonized quadrant of really awesome teaching, but most teachers don't feel comfortable teaching in it, and the public, they feel, isn't quite always ready to accept it. So they found that most other subjects in higher education strayed away from that 4th quadrant, but I found that the teacher educators were really embracing it in many of the articles. And we do have some articles within the instrumental transformative, but we really didn't see any that were content focused and emancipatory. And I think that's just because once we are kind of, as teacher educators, focusing on the processes and kind of giving or once we're giving them agency to say, hey, how are you going to do this? It is process focused. So I think that's why we really didn't have anything in that bottom right quadrant. So what does this mean? Significance in further work. I found that the teacher educators really weren't trending ecocentric. They definitely were represented there, but most were still much more anthropocentric than ecocentric. And as for Poppenfuss's framework, I found that they were more transformative and emancipatory than other fields, really building on that agency, that being, that full embodiment of sustainability. So I need to do further analysis, of course. I want to look into the kind of inductive coding that I began. So the meanings of sustainability, how they're defining student learning and evaluation, program successes, program challenges. And I really need to dive further into these explanations to see, why these trends exist. I'm also working on finding a secondary coder, preferably one who hasn't seen my results, to have a bit more reliability before I attempt to publish this in a journal. So in true poster fashion, I have only cited 2 of my sources here, namely my 2 frameworks. But for a full list of literature, my coding matrix, and a copy of the poster, you are welcome to visit my personal website, sextonscience.com. There is a page called Conference Materials. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to answering your questions during our official poster session. Thanks so much. Bye.